The backbone of a weekly local newspaper is the kind of news you get to know about just by talking to people. So, in a little town like Horbury, the newspaper man has to know pretty well everyone. Johnny Rooney, for instance, who keeps the newsagent's shop in Queen Street. He's usually good for a paragraph. Or Joe Batty over the way. He's always glad to stop for a chat. You pick up a lot of information from the odd encounter. Jack Kilburn is secretary of Horbury Juniors Football Club, and in summer he'll have the cricket scores. Or it's quite likely you'll be stopped in the road and told of something, a meeting or a marriage, an accident or a death. You can never really tell when you may uncover a story. Naturally, the local reporter has his regular sources too. The town hall is worth visiting twice a week. The pulse of the community, you might call it. Mr. Senior, who's clerk to the council, can give you the developments since the last council meeting, tell you the nominations at election time, anything new in the local government line. Housing schemes, building plans. You hear about those from Mr. Clapham in the surveyor's office. And the township's health comes under Ted Richley, the sanitary inspector. After the town hall, there's a familiar round of weekly calls. Interviews with the people whose jobs keep them up to date in what's going on around town. There are 5 clubs in Horbury, and they're all worth a visit. Clubs for all politics and all ages, games and sports results, football and snooker, dominoes and cribbage and whist, club elections and the club accounts, the club steward's personal report on the last bowls tournament. Like every community, Horbury has its public-spirited individuals who know what's going on. Norman Fox, who breeds budgies when he's not driving buses, is the man who got Mussolini's white horse to lead Horbury's pageant in 1948. Now, as secretary of the pageant committee, he's busy with plans for the coronation. Chapel news comes from the ladies, who spoke at last Wednesday's Bright Hour. What lady obliged with a solo? What's announced for next week? Not that everything's routine. Mr. Crook, for instance, who served 30 years on the council, is reported to be growing his own tobacco. He dries it and smokes it as well. There's a new housing estate going up at Manor Fields. Readers will be interested to hear about that. 2 of the houses are scheduled to go up in the record time of 23 days. Does the contractor think they'll make it? Or what are they going to be like inside? There's a birthday visit to be made to Horbury's oldest resident. Mrs. Mary Crompton is 98. What she thinks and what she remembers is important news to her friends and relations and neighbours. But the Horbury column occupies only a corner of the whole newspaper called the Wakefield Express, which in March 1952 started its 101st volume. Go back 100 years. In 1852, Wakefield was a Yorkshire country town where they drove sheep through the cobbled streets. 12,000 people lived in Wakefield then, when it still had one of the biggest grain and cattle markets in the country, and its industrial revolution was only just beginning. That was when John Robinson started his Wakefield Express, a liberal weekly selling its few hundred copies for 4pence halfpenny each. Since then, the Express has grown with Wakefield. 50 years later, the town has become a city of 40,000 people, miners, engineers, textile workers. Muck has brought money, and money has brought muck. The Express, under John Robinson's son, is selling over 10,000 copies. Another 50 years has filled the city streets with the heavy transport of industry. Today, the shoppers in Wakefield Market are drawn from a population of 60,000 people. Every Saturday today, the Express sells over 36,000 copies. But that's not all. Wakefield is more than a city. It's the capital of an area. Round it stretches the varied landscape of the West Riding, a landscape of towns and fields and industry. Through the years, the Express has multiplied into a series, 5 related newspapers which together cover this busy and prosperous corner of Yorkshire. From Wakefield to Pontefract and Castleford, South Elmsall and Hemsworth, Selby and Tadcaster. Each week, 70,000 copies of the series papers go out over the area. All 5 papers are published from Wakefield, where the head office stands by the cathedral in Little Westgate. Here, the monthly conference of editors is still presided over by Robinsons. Now it's old John Robinson's great-grandsons, Michael and Brian, who are the directors of the firm. Under them is a board of 4 editors. Stanley Hinchliffe for Hemsworth, Herbert Moorhouse for Wakefield, Leonard Mill for Pontefract, and J.B. Hare for Selby and Skyrack. 70,000 newspapers a week means a fair amount of organisation. A weekly issue of the series uses 20 reels of paper weighing 750 pounds each, about 90 miles of paper in all. Engineers, craftsmen and labourers make the paper, as well as staffs of reporters in Wakefield and in branch offices. The illustrations are looked after by the photographic department, which sends its cameraman out to record every day the changing expressions of the district. With 100 years' growth behind them, local contacts are naturally strong. A lot of news is phoned into the office by ready volunteers, tips on likely stories, results of bazaars and flag days. But that still leaves plenty of ground to be covered outside the office by the paper's own reporters. The Pinder, that's the pen name of the Wakefield Express sports reporter, leaves national and international events to look after themselves. Wakefield Trinity is the team that occupies headlines all through the rugby league season. The Pinder's job doesn't end with sitting in the press box at matches. He's a regular visitor at the Bellevue ground when the team is practising in the evening. He'll chat with Jim Closton, Trinity's coach, or stop a new member of the team to get his background and particulars for the record. When they're not in front of the public, a team sometimes shows its quality more clearly than in matches. Watching the coach try out a new idea, observing the form of the players at practice, talking informally with the club's chairman, the sports writer gets to know the reasons for what happened last Saturday. Trinity have their ups and downs, it's true. Still, if they're not discouraged, why should we be? There's always next season's chances to be reckoned with. Ways of life and enjoyment in the West Riding are largely traditional. In summertime, towns and villages alike hold their celebrations, and not many weeks go by without there's a carnival to cover. Carnival time in Pontefract may not be what it is in Nice or Rio, but the same ingredients are there. Starts from Northgate outside the Church of England school. There are children in fancy dress, 5 tableaux on decorated lorries, a pony club on horseback, and a brass band to lead the way. The march takes them through the streets, up the hill, and on to the barracks field. On the main road between Wakefield and Pontefract stands the mining village of Charleston. It's never a busy place, but today the streets are more than usually empty. Most of the people are gathered in front of the church, where they built a war memorial after the First World War. In September 1952, 13 more names have been engraved on its base. Over at Fitzwilliam, a dusty, featureless line of houses by a colliery, a bunch of kids have got up a concert party for Dr. Barnardo's. These are the voices of Fitzwilliam's children.
When the piano plays, I could dance for days and days. Precious, that's play the everyday round. From the sun and moonlight young, from the campsite falling down. Red hot, that's play the everyday round. Let's dance a little honey and daisy and a little honey and well, I'd climb and would not fall. I'd wreck and wreck with rags so then the window clean I get. Is it as bright as you can wish? Here comes the duster, swishy swish. And the shine of your light, and the laughter in your eyes. There's a green light in our lives. You are the one I love. You are the every light you live. You send the rain shine into blue. Now you are what makes life worthwhile with the sunshine on your side. Off we just ran, light sings again. From Leicestershire, from town, this lovely rain has flown away. The time has come to time. We'll kiss again, light it again. From Leicestershire, from home, with love that's true, I'll wait for you. I'll be
The road to Selby crosses a softer landscape. 60 miles from the sea, this flourishing market town has an unexpected industry, building seagoing tankers. E.G. Chilvers of the express office in Selby usually turns up to watch a launching, together with the men who made her and anyone else who may happen by. Further inland, Rule Britannia is appropriate too. In Ossett Square, the townsfolk are assembled, dressed for the public eye, to welcome their young hero, Philip Mickman, the channel swimmer, home from the sea. Behind the excitement of celebration and amusement persists the routine of local government. In councils throughout the area, parish, rural, urban, right up to the city council itself, citizens get together to discuss their affairs and to run the community by persuasion, argument and vote. There is no function more important than the administration of justice. In courts of law, other citizens meet to sit in judgment on their fellows. The reporter's pencil is always there, recording the varied display of the region's way of life. The stories come in typescript. For printing, they must be reset in lead type. As the copy arrives in the works from the reporters and sub-editors upstairs, it is dealt out to the linotype operators. On the linos, the typescript is cast into lines of type, 275 in an hour, automatically spaced by the machine. When his article is cast, the operator hands back the copy with the block of type. The pressman takes the type on a galley and inserts spaces and headings. Next, the galley goes on to the hand press, is inked and placed under a strip of newsprint, and a rough proof is taken. The pressman files the block of type on its galley and folds the proof with the original copy. Proofreading is a job for experts, for niceness and precision, as well as for experience. The proof is meticulously checked for correctness in dates and proper names, as well as to ensure the proper observance of correct procedure in punctuation and spelling. Once passed, with or without further linotype corrections, the amended proofs are hung up in the works according to the paper for which each story is intended. The type is filed away on its galley until it is needed for making up into pages. Pictures are important. Everybody likes to see their picture or their friend's picture in the paper. Frank Millard, who runs the Express photographic department, has to turn out 60 or 70 blocks a week for reproducing photographs onto newsprint. These are chosen by the editors, not only from the work of the series' own cameramen, but from a multitude of snaps and portraits sent in by readers, or dug up out of the office files, often presenting tricky problems of reproduction. Reporting what happened during the week is only half the paper's job. Buying and selling is a traditional Yorkshire occupation, and, like most newspapers, the Express allots over half its space to its advertisers. The advertising representative calls regularly on the city shopkeepers, inviting their orders and making suggestions for the layout of their advertisements. One of the most popular of the Express features are the little announcements, the classified smalls, put in by private tradesmen and individuals. Sewing machine for sale, fish and chip shop wanted, clean bed sitting room to let, articles lost and found, births, marriages and deaths, in memoriam and thanks for sympathy. All week they come in by post and telephone or across the counter in Little Westgate. 4 o'clock on Friday is the deadline. Now the galleys have been fetched from the shelves, the type is lifted off and assembled into pages with the unhesitating sense of position of hands that have been fitting these columns into place every week for many years. The completed page is tightened, locked into its form, and finally levelled off. The form is lifted onto a mangle, the half-tone blocks are removed, and the page is again levelled off. A hand roller coats the surface of the type with ink, and a sheet of newsprint is laid across the form. The page goes under the mangle to produce the final proof, not for spelling and setting mistakes this time, so much as for positioning and general layout. When the page proof is okayed, the page goes under the mangle again. The newsprint has now been replaced by a stiff papier-mâché mould. The 7-ton pressure of the mangle has given this the imprint of type and half-tone blocks, the fine reproduction in relief of the page on the form. Blank spaces on the underside of the mould are strengthened by packing with paper felt, and it is placed in a casting box. The box is closed, and the pull of a lever floods into it, in direct contact with the mould, a charge of molten lead. The box is water-cooled. In less than 30 seconds, the box can be unlocked and the lead casting, now carrying the impression of the page, lifted out. The mould is stripped away and the casting goes in to the boring machine for trimming. Rough edges are trimmed off the casting by hand. As printing time approaches, the half-ton reels of paper, 4.5 miles of paper on each, are rolled to the press room. 3 at a time, these are threaded up on the rotary press, a machine which will run off 22,500 copies an hour of a 12-page paper, printed, folded and counted. As the pages are completed, the castings are carried to the press room and positioned on the rotary. It's just over 2.5 hours since the last small ads were handed in at the office. Now, as blocks of type, they're inserted into the last gap, and the front page, always the last to be made up, can be closed. The last mould and the last casting are made, and at 7 o'clock on Friday, the Wakefield Express goes to bed. Slowly, the paper crawls off the reels and through the press, powered at first by a 5-horsepower auxiliary motor. The paper crawls, ink flows, and the page castings turn against the white newsprint. Speed jumps up as the 25-horsepower motor takes over. $22,500 copies an hour, counted and folded. The paper runs and the ink flows. As the press pounds away and the papers stream out, attention must all the time be paid to the quality of the printing. The margins and the inking kept all the time just so. By 10 o'clock, or earlier with luck, printing is finished. The paper is on its way out to show Wakefield its own face. And that, to cut a long story short, is how every Saturday morning in this part of Yorkshire